This is Rebel Therapist, a podcast for entrepreneurs who are trained as therapists and who want to level up their businesses, make a bigger impact, feel fulfilled, and be very well paid. I'm your host, Annie Schusler. Before I dive in, as this is being released, tomorrow is the last day to sign up for early access to create your program. Doors are closing at the end of Wednesday, November 20th. So do you have a sense of what having your own course or program could do for your career? It can be a real game changer. If you've been sitting on an idea for a while, I want to invite you to create your program with me. This is the process where you take your incredible strengths as a therapist or a healer and you create your signature program so you can serve more people, make more money, and get your best ideas out of your head and into a unique container that you're going to be able to offer over and over again. We go through an 11-week process together, step by step, so that you're actually launching your program during our time together with my support. Head over to rebeltherapist.me/create to enroll now. You're going to get 2 really special bonuses by enrolling now. I ran a free and open coaching call recently for everyone in our audience, including clients and folks on my email list. And we had such great questions that I decided to share the recording with you. Some of the questions include how to do spotlight coaching on group calls, how to fill a group, what are some great niches for programs, and whether or not you need to use social media. All right, here it is. I'm just going to dive into the first question that I got. What types of questions should I be asking myself to know what type of program would be a good fit for me to create? I think the first question I would ask myself in deciding what type of program might be a good fit for me to create is, what is your purpose for wanting to create a program? So what's your primary purpose of wanting to do it? You probably have a lot of reasons, but what would you say your primary purpose is? Is it preventing burnout? Like maybe the way you're doing your career right now, you're noticing is getting harder and harder, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And so maybe your reason for creating a program is, I can't be burning out. I need to keep having a career. So I want to create a program that will be preventing my burnout. Or could it be that your primary purpose is to add income to your business? Or is your primary purpose for creating a program to have an outlet for creativity? You can see there could be overlap. You could actually create a program that accomplishes all 3 of those things, but I think it's going to help you decide what to look at creating to tune into what's your primary purpose. The next question I would ask myself is, what parts of myself do I want to be using more in this program? So do I want to be teaching more? Do I think I want to be facilitating more? Do I want to be writing more? Because there's an opportunity for that in your marketing. Do I want to be creating curriculum, creating a sacred space that's different than what I get to create maybe in my therapy practice? Do I want to be collaborating more? Like, what are you hungering for that you're not getting to do enough of? And then I would ask myself, how much time do I have to dedicate to this every week? And the reason I want you to ask yourself that is that might help you decide what kind of program you just have the bandwidth to create. You might love the idea of creating a global community within a particular topic. And if you only have an hour a week to dedicate to this process, don't do that. Do something very simple instead. And then see if over time you end up having more bandwidth. That was an extreme example to illustrate. And then I would ask yourself, this is like kind of a fun part, what topics or topic are you positively obsessed with? And I say a positive obsession, that's something that Octavia Butler coins that phrase, is a positive obsession, something that you kind of can't stop yourself from thinking about, talking about. So if there's something that you sort of annoy your friends with how much you want to work on it and talk about it, that might be a great topic for you. And then I would also ask yourself, what do I dread doing? So in my life, in my business, do I dread technology, like dealing with technology or learning new technology? Do I dread one-on-one sessions? Do I dread the idea of public speaking in any form? That could help you to decide what kind of program you're going to create. If you are hating tech and you don't want to be learning tech, then you should avoid running a program that would require a big audience or a high volume of participants. So stay away from, like we were talking about, that global membership. If you don't love tech, stay away from that and stay away from self-led courses, just for example, and go into more something that's going to be very simple, high touch, small number of participants. On the other hand, if you dread, maybe because you're just doing a lot of it in your life, if you dread holding people for a long period of time in their process, and that's something a lot of therapists deal with because they're already doing so much of it, if that's something that you're dreading, but you do like deep work, then maybe you want to look towards something like an online retreat or intensive model where you get to work with people deeply, but then bless them and let them be on their way. And then I think the biggest question I would ask myself in terms of what type of program would be a good fit for me to create is, what am I ready to run an experiment with? Because you're going to learn a lot through that first, we call it a pilot around here, by running that pilot. And so it's okay if you run a pilot and you discover that wasn't the format for me. That's not how I want to do it next time. That is absolutely fine. So ask yourself, what kind of experiment do I feel excited about running? Okay. So that was a great question with like a lot of questions in it. So the next one is, do you think in-person or online programs are more in demand right now? So I think both are always going to be in demand, unless we're in a pandemic or there's some reason why one or the other is just not a possibility. I think both are going to be always in demand from now on. For the creator, online programs are generally going to be easier to fill because even though there's always going to be a demand for in-person contact, which is just so delicious and deep and just brings things that online doesn't, there's always going to be a demand for that. And online is so convenient, and it's a way that you get to work with people from everywhere. And so as people are figuring out what they have room for in their lives, online is just always going to be an easier for more people more of the time to say yes to. I mean, that said, one of my best friends was just over and she was so excited to be going to the first session of an in-person class that evening. And we were just both like, oh my gosh, what's that going to be like? Who's going to be there? Who are you going to meet? There's nothing like it. And she's got 2 kids. She's got a full life like people do. And so it was really something to carve that out and then make her way there week after week. So both are always going to be in demand. And I tend to help people create online programs just because it gives you so much freedom in what you want to create, when you want to create it, who you want to work with, and all of those things. The next question, this is about, to give you some context. I did a podcast episode that just came out a week ago about how to run group calls. And one thing I talked about there was spotlight coaching. And then so the question is about that. Sometimes you might want to do spotlight coaching instead of always group discussion. The reason that you might sometimes want to do that is in your particular area that you've created this program around, it's very likely that you, with your positive obsession of it, maybe personal experience with it, maybe a ton of professional experience, they're paying to be there and hear from you. And you might be able to see very quickly some ways that you could help a participant move forward with an issue that other people in the group are not going to be able to see. And so spotlight coaching can be at times a really good thing to have on group calls. And therapists tend to sometimes, people who have experience as therapists tend to sometimes want to tap into the group wisdom because we really know how to do that. And so I want to also give you permission to sometimes be the leader and step into your expertise. Okay, so the question with all of that context, are there any prompts or more guidance on how to go about spotlight coaching? I'm not sure about how to go about this in my program. I'm going to be offering a 4-week, 90-minute program series. Okay, so the way I think about spotlight coaching, just to give you sort of a sense of how my brain works on this, is it's probably going to be with each spotlight coaching, you're just working with one person in front of the group, which often is very helpful to the group to get to hear what this person is dealing with and to hear your take on it. And it's probably going to be somewhere between 2 minutes and 15 minutes, depending on how complex the issue is and how soon the person feels full. It's different than what might happen in a therapy session in that you're probably going to contain the question in scope, and rather than exploring and asking a whole bunch of follow-up questions, which we might explore in a therapy session, you're going to stay zeroed in on one topic a little more narrowly. And you can think of it as kind of workshopping a particular issue and helping this person get from where they are right now to the next best question to explore for themselves, or the next best spot to be working on this issue for themselves. So you don't necessarily need to feel like you're giving them the answer in that coaching moment. And then if you do feel like, I just have the answer for them, I know what they need to do, I know I have an answer for this one because of my experience, then it's fine to give them the answer, but then back up a little bit and tell them what is informing your answer so that they can take it or leave it with that information. And they're kind of learning how to think about the issue differently rather than just getting your answer. And so in spotlight coaching, you might find yourself, when you're closing up that particular interaction, saying something like, okay, that feels like a pretty good place to leave that for now, or how did that land so far? But you're not trying to like tie everything up in a bow, Dr. Phil style. Okay, our next question is, do I have to set up coaching programs separate from my therapy business? And so my answer to that is maybe and probably. And in Create Your Program, which is my container, we bring in a guest expert who's an attorney, Brandy Matthews. And what I tend to hear her say over and over again is, if it's work that you can't be doing under your license, you're going to need to make it clear that this program is not therapy. And the specifics of how you're going to do that and how you're going to structure it separately, that can really depend on a lot of things. So that's why I'm saying maybe and probably, and it depends. For people who are participants in CYP, you already know this, or you should know this, but we have a library of all the Q&As our attorneys have done. So we have them answering like over 100 questions, which participants can browse through that library and see if you get your question answered by hearing her talk through other people's business questions. And then when you're in the program, you get to also ask your particular question of her. The way you're going to do it is going to depend on things like where you live, what your license is, what your topic is, how your topic relates to the topic within your therapy practice. And so that's why it gets like a maybe and depends answer. And because I'm so not a legal expert. Okay, the next question is, what goals should we aim for when starting a group? How many members, cost, time commitment, and what's the best way to fill the group? I'm going to take a step back in that, of course, it's going to depend a ton on you, on what you've already got going for you in your business. But I am just going to answer this in terms of what works for most people most of the time. Starting very small and very simply with your pilot is a great way to go. Short-term goals. So you're asking, what goals should we aim for when starting a group? And that's going to be really different than what you might want long-term in your business. But starting something high quality and simple quickly is a really great way to get your business going. In the first time that you run your program, especially if it's a group program, a lot of the value is going to be that you are very present, you're positively obsessed with your topic, and you're giving a lot of yourself. especially in those early iterations. So I would say in terms of how many group members, I would start with as few as 3 or 4 people. And in fact, I've made an argument many times that you could start with as many as 1 people for a group. If you decide you're starting a group and then you didn't get the people you were hoping for and you get 1 person, we could absolutely talk about running your quote unquote group the first time for 1 person, but definitely 3 or 4 people, and start with a short enough time frame that you're going to be able to get feedback and reiterate pretty quickly. So like, for example, I would never start with a year-long program, even if you feel like, but my topic needs a year. For a first time, it tends to be too long before you get to reiterate and pivot and kind of make adjustments for the things that you want to change the second time around. To give you a more specific answer, I would start with somewhere between 1 and 8 sessions. That's going to give you enough time to really make some progress with your participants and to not be kind of stuck in a program that isn't working the way you were hoping that it would for, 6 months or a year. So somewhere between probably 1 and 8 sessions. And then for the cost, especially if you are a therapist, if you are somebody who's been working with people, who is trained, who has experience, you are probably, and I kind of want to take away probably, like you have so much more to offer than you even realize. I would charge more than $500 for your pilot program, and probably a lot more than that. But I want to just throw that out as like, you're probably not going to be charging less than that. And that's for people who just really have a hard time charging enough to at least give you that answer. And it's okay also for the pilot program to cost less than future iterations. So if you want to charge a relatively small amount for the pilot because you just want to get it going and you're not feeling that confident yet, like I know you're going to become a lot more confident after the first time you run it. And for like the people who are here who I've worked with before, I know you've experienced that. Once you started working with your group, you saw, oh my gosh, I have plenty to give these people. I can't believe I doubted myself. Like that kind of thing comes up for people. The last part of your question was, what's the best way to fill the group? The best way to fill your group the first time is probably going to be with people who already know you and trust your work, and maybe like 1 degree of separation. You're going to be simultaneously starting to grow your audience and starting to get known by more people. But in the very beginning, you're probably going to fill your group with the relationships you already have, and then the relationships those people already have. And so you want to definitely fall in love with the program you're creating to the point where you can really enthusiastically share it with everyone. Everyone you know should know about your program so that they can be telling people about it and encouraging people to get in touch with you. And that's how you're going to fill your first program. But that's not going to be how you can fill your program for the rest of your career. You need to have new people getting aware of your program after the pilot. So that's something that we start working on in CYP, is growing an email list and beginning that process so that when you're running it the second time, the third time, the fourth time, it's going to start being filled with people who didn't know about you when you started this program. So this next question is kind of fun also. What are some growth areas for groups for women in particular? I'm assuming what this means is like some niches, like what are some niches that are looking hot? And I'll give you a few answers, and then I want to do what I said I encourage people to do, which is like go a step back and explain why I'm saying these might be good niches. One would be particular kinds of relationships, like a group for women in a particular kind of relationship. Parenting, and probably more specifically around particular issues within parenting. Sex, again, more specific than just sex, but the topic of sex. Money, grief, your relationship with your body. I think another one that could be interesting and really growing one would be friendship. And then another area could be, and there's overlap here, integrating a new identity or life stage. So that could be in sexuality, becoming aware of one's sexuality in a different way. Like maybe you discover you're bisexual or you're asexual, or being over 50, being non-binary, going through divorce. So like integrating a new identity. And when I say that, I don't mean create a group for all women who are integrating new identities. I mean that identity. It's that particular identity. Okay, so now I want to take a step back and say, why did I name those things? For a great niche, you want to be looking for something that is going to be really important to the participant. Like this is something they are walking around trying to solve, talking to their friends about, or wishing they could talk to their friends about, and it's really important to them. And it's not so broad that it applies to just everyone. It's specific enough that it only applies to some people. And it's something that's tricky enough that it really requires a process to make progress on. And that's because if it's not tricky, you just kind of don't need to pay for a program around it, even if it's very interesting. If you look at those combination of factors, you want your niche to fall somewhere in there. And I also want to say, like, niching is tricky. I'm not expecting that you heard me talk about that for 3 minutes and you got it. You know what your niche is. It's very tricky, but that should get you started on thinking these could be some areas. And avoid going into something because you think it's a hot niche. Go into it because you're obsessed with it as well. Like one niche that I see is really needed, and I know there are people doing great work in it, but it's like we need more, is like around blended families. I don't know. I'm not in a blended family. I don't know much about blended families. So that would certainly not be the niche for me to pick up just because it's not like the stock market. You really need to pick what is something you're going to be obsessed with. Okay. Now we got a question. Do therapists need to be trained as coaches? Nope. In order to be a coach, what you need to say is, I'm a coach. And then you're a coach. So it's a completely unregulated field. One cool thing about that for you who are a healer or a therapist, someone who already has been doing incredible work, is you have a lot of cred compared to a coach who just put out their shingle and said, I'm a coach, and maybe has or hasn't even done a weekend workshop on coaching. You have a ton of expertise. And so the tricky thing about the fact that it's an unregulated field is that while there's a lot of incredible work that coaches do, there's a lot of crappy coaching. I know we could say the same thing about therapy, but I like to just notice and point out that you are very ahead in the coaching field already with all the experience that you have. And I also want to say, like, I've gotten a lot of benefit working with people who are coaches and who were never therapists. So I'm not trying to like throw those folks under the bus. Got another one here. I wonder to hear more about how you go from a general to a more specific niche topic and how to know where you need to be. Like, is trauma healing specific enough? How to get more specific? One way to think this through is something I like to call the cousin test. It's a term I coined, where when you tell someone about your niche, do you tend to get the response of like, I need that and everyone I know needs that. That's amazing. Or do you get the response of, oh, I know someone who should do your program? And if it's, I know someone who should do your program, that's actually better in terms of having a viable niche that you can like grow a program and make money with. Because if it's specific enough, it's going to give those particular people the sense that they belong in that group. And it's going to be easier for them to find you. You're going to need to be the one to know what direction you want to narrow in, if you want to narrow. But with trauma healing, one direction you could narrow in is like, what kind of trauma, for example. So if I'm a survivor of a particular category of trauma and I see a group that's for people with like a similar experience, similar enough experience, I'm going to personally be way more drawn to that group. I'm going to feel like I'm likely to feel understood there. I'm likely to not have to explain how and why that was traumatic. in a way that I maybe do in the rest of my life. I'm going to know that that group leader created it for people just like me. So that's one way that you could think about narrowing it. That's one way to get more specific. All right. And then the next question, if I'm trying to reach people across the country or world, does it still make sense to build up local connections and local networking? I think it does, depending. And so I know a little bit about this question asker. So I have like a little inside scoop. Like if you live in a place where there are a lot of other people who care about your niche, who work in some way or another in your niche or in a closely associated niche, then why not? Right? Because if they're right there, that means you can actually get together for coffee with them. You can actually probably create an even closer bond than if they lived further away. So even though you could serve people from everywhere in the world with your program, and you do, it's also great to really dive into the people nearby and then know that you're not limited to that. And then you can look at it in terms of like the people who you know locally. They probably also know other local people, and they also can probably introduce you to people all over the world. So yeah, I think both going deep with your connections and going broad is great, both geographically and like in terms of closeness and how well you know them. Like you don't want to talk to the same 3 people all the time because they've already sent you everyone they can, but you want to keep those close relationships while you also spread out. Okay, the idea of creating a group program and running a group call makes my head explode. Do you have any sense of if individual or group programs tend to be more successful in enrollment? Yeah, I mean, individual is always going to be the easiest to fill. And if you want to run a program and keep it just a one-on-one program, that is a beautiful business model. And it doesn't have to be the same thing as a therapy practice. You can have a very niched coaching practice with a really different offer than you have in a therapy practice. You can have like a shorter process. You can have a much more structured process, a much more niched process. That is my favorite way for people to start actually with their coaching program, is to start one-on-one, but structured and with a very particular outcome. And then that can be a beautiful place to very quickly, if you want to, pivot it into a group. But if you don't want to pivot into a group, it's a nice, simple business model. And you don't, like some of the advantages of that, you actually don't need to grow a huge audience. You can fill that business with probably just some ideal referralship partnerships. And then you can make it a group program over time if you want to. And sometimes when people come to work with me because they want to stop doing as much one-on-one work, and then one thing they hear me say is like, you might want to start running this one-on-one. And sometimes people are like, why would I want to do that? That's what I'm trying to stop doing. But sometimes we can go slow to go fast, where if we create the program itself and get it going quickly with one-on-one, we can actually be running a group program even sooner than if we started it as a group. So it's nuanced. For group programs, how essential is it to use social media as a tool to grow our niche community? It is not essential. So you could grow an audience without social media or without very much social media, but you're going to need to do something. One thing you could do, for example, is get on podcasts as a guest and have a way that people can, it can't be social media then, but have a way that people can get in touch with you and get into your orbit, like to get on your email list, for example. You could have your own podcast, although that isn't going to grow your audience as fast as being on other people's podcasts. You can do collaborations with other people who are in your niche, but probably like working with people in a different way within your niche. And you can run a free event together where you're growing both of your audiences by collaborating, or you could be a guest for their audience and then they could be a guest for your audience. And so if you're not using social media, those are some of the things you would want to be making sure you're doing instead so that you're not hiding. If you're like, I don't like to use social media, then I would sort of lead with that. not in a holier than thou kind of way, but just sort of lead with it like, that's interesting and talk about why. There is definitely a growing number of entrepreneurs who are building robust businesses without it. I would tap into that and just make sure you're not hiding. The other option is, if you don't like social media, is use social media, but just minimally, not expecting a big return on that investment, but just having it for those who would have a harder time finding you without it. The next thing, I've been playing with the idea of writing articles and listicles as a way to grow my audience. I haven't actually done it yet, but I'm thinking about it. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah. And that's another one in terms of, if you're not using social media, search engine optimization is going to be long term a great way for people to find you, and things like articles and listicles, and making sure you have them on your site. Even if you do also share them on social media, making sure you have them on your site so that people can over time find you in that way. And the next question, do I need some type of insurance for liability if I decide to switch from therapy to coaching? Yes, definitely not an expert on this, but my understanding has been, from hearing our legal expert talk about it a bunch of times, is you want to make sure it's not very expensive, but you want to make sure when you get your liability insurance for your coaching work, if your coaching work is not under your license, you want to make sure that you have separate insurance, because the one that's protecting you under your license, you're going to need a different one. So it's easy to get. It's not very expensive, but yes, you're going to want that eventually. I always want to say that with things, especially around the topics of tech, legal stuff, and things like insurance, there's some of us that are intimidated by those things, or some of those things. And so I always want to emphasize, like, it's just a step-by-step process, figuring these things out. And you've done harder things. Like, I promise you, you've done harder things than this. And then another question, would your legal expert be able to recommend a legal expert in Canada? I think she would, or she would know exactly how you'd find the right one, depending on your particular situation, what kind of needs you might have. And do I help people start coaching practices? Yes. Yes, absolutely. So the way that I help people is through choosing your niche and then designing a particular coaching program. And yeah, that is what I do. And I love it. And I love this comment. Something I'm working on is trying to view it all as an experiment. It helps me approach it a little more lightheartedly and feel less stress about it. Yeah. I heard the coach Rachel Rodgers, the business coach Rachel Rodgers, say recently that as micro business owners, as entrepreneurs, we call it a mistake, whereas a huge corporation would just call it research and development. So we kind of have this tendency, partly because we don't have as many resources, we don't have a whole research and development department in our companies, but we make it really hard on ourselves when we expect that we're going to get it right the first time and that it's a problem if we don't, because that's just not how that works. And so I think it really sets us up to beat ourselves up or to feel like failures when that's not at all what's happening. Like, we're running experiments. And as long as we are getting the information we can get ahead of the experiment to run the right enough experiment, then that really is how we keep improving our businesses. It's not just like let's spin it into something positive. Like, that is the only way. Like, what in our lives do we get really good at by just getting it right the whole time? Like, that's not how we became good therapists. That's not like how we become decent parents or partners or friends. So yeah, if it's important and if it's hard, we just keep fucking it up and then doing it better and like learning from those like quote unquote fuck ups. Anybody want to share an experiment that you're thinking of running or have run recently?
Yeah. So I took Annie's program, I think it was 3 years ago now, maybe three and a half. I took Create Your program and then the one after that, Mastermind. And I have been basically just kind of running a series of experiments since then, running my group, changing it a little more. And recently I just changed it quite a bit where I went from doing an 8 week cohort model to it's a little longer now. It's 3 months and it's a rolling enrollment. And that is like a full on experiment. And it's a little scary to think about it like an experiment because I put a lot of work into it. I had to make all of my live lessons recorded lessons. And so people can do the lesson piece self-paced on their own. And then when we come into community each week, it's talking about what they're learning and just more like spotlight coaching and group support. And so I've been doing it almost a month now since I launched the new experiment. And yeah, I mean, I don't know how it's going to go yet, but it's daunting and it's a little scary, but it's also very exciting. And it's been so helpful to me to think about it as an experiment. Yeah. So
What did you feel like in starting the experiment? What do you think you would have said your biggest hope would be?
I think my biggest hope is, well, there were two. One was I wanted to reach more people because what was happening is I would have a wait list until I opened up again. And so people would find me and then maybe like by the time I opened up again, they would have moved on. And so I
Yeah.
wanted to be able to like really reach people right when they needed me. So that was one. And then the other hope was that I wanted to move away from this anxiety around doing a launch a few times a
Hmm.
year. And every time I did the launch, having this like, is anyone coming to my birthday party sort of
Hmm.
like stress. And instead just have it be like, it's anyone can join at any time. And sometimes there will be more and sometimes it'll be less. But it's kind of this ongoing thing without these concentrated like moments of stress and launch.
Yeah, totally. What was it like recording everything?
It was really great. I mean, it was like harder and easier than I thought it would be in some ways. It was easy in that I've been teaching this stuff for 3 years now. And so it was like, it felt good and it made so much, once I started doing it, I was like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense to have it recorded instead of
Yeah.
just having to teach it live. It was definitely a bigger project than I thought it was going to be, though, just in that, like, it takes a lot of time to record and then to edit and then to upload
Mhm.
onto a platform where people can share it or where I can share it with people. So, yeah, that it was way more work than I thought it would be. And now that it's done, I am so, so glad that I have it all recorded. I feel really good about that. Another experiment I'm thinking about doing is at some point selling just as a self-guided without the group component, just
Mhm.
the 10 weeks of recorded lessons for a less expensive, more accessible for people thing. It does feel like it expands my options now that I've got that library of my lessons recorded.
That's beautiful. And so I'm always telling people like, don't pre-record for your pilot, like run it live. No pressure. I love it when people disagree with me. So there's not a setup. But what do you think about that, having done it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that I didn't do it right away because
Okay.
I've shifted things a lot. I've learned as I've gone and I've changed things and I've taken the feedback that I've gotten from my participants. There was one lesson in particular when it was an 8 week course that was just falling flat every
Mm.
time I did it. And it wasn't until I like the third or fourth time I did it where I was like, I really need to change this up. And I did. And I think it's so much better now. Had I recorded it in the beginning, it would have just been stuck as that thing. I also think about like, I'm probably going to go need to record some of these over time too, right? But it won't be such a big project next time because it'll be like, oh, okay, I'm going to record 1 week because I'm changing it or another week, but not like the whole thing. Thinking from where I was before to where I am now. Yeah, I don't think it would definitely wouldn't have made sense for me to record it the first time I ran it.
Great. Not great that you agree with me, just great to hear what it was actually like. And we're going to leave it there. Thank you to everyone who came to that call and everyone who submitted questions. And thank you for listening. Remember, tomorrow, Wednesday, November 20th, is the last day to enroll in CYP and get 2 valuable bonuses. Live calls start in January, but if you sign up now, you're going to get 2 months of early access to the lessons, and you're going to get those bonuses. So head to rebeltherapist.me/create. I'll see you next time. I want to thank Ames Palms for editing this podcast. If you found this episode supportive, please do a couple of things. Share it with your favorite therapist or healer. That is absolutely the most important way we reach more people. And if you haven't already, please hit follow and give us 5 stars. That is so helpful to this podcast. And thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.